everyone, my name is Natalie. Today I'm going to continue on with my library tour. Today I'm going to be showing you the rest of my translated books, which are all Japanese books on this shelf, and also my nature nonfiction. I'm really excited to share this shelf. As you all probably know, I love nature nonfiction. It's probably my favorite subgenre of any literature and definitely my favorite part of my book collection. So it's going to be fun to talk you through my books. If you have any questions about any of the books that I talk about, then feel free to share it in the comments, or I would also love to know what you've thought about any of the books that I cover. All of the book reviews that I've either written or done in video format will also be linked in the description along with the titles as always. So I think that was all I wanted to say as an introduction. I hope you're having a fantastic day and you will enjoy this video. Bye. So now we're on to the third shelf of my library tour. We have Battle Royale by Koushun Takami, and this is I remember when Hunger Games came out the first time, or when the books were actually being published, that some people were complaining about Suzanne Collins stealing the idea of this book. So it's a similar setup in that a lot of young people are forced into a situation where they have to kill each other to win and to be released. This is a much darker psychological take on this kind of story. The next one is Evil and the Mask by Fuminori Nakamura, and this is an author that I've read a few books by. So I've read The Thief and The Gun as well. I didn't like The Gun very much. I think it's probably his most famous one. He is generally just a crime mystery writer with quite dark themes as well, and this is my favorite of his so far. Next is Granta. This is a literary magazine, and this particular issue is the 127 Japan issue. So this collects various writings about Japan or by Japanese authors. I thought that this issue was so well edited. Then we have a few of my Natsuo Kirino books. So I've read all of her books that has been translated into English, but I don't own all of them, so I think I'm missing one. We have the Goddess Chronicle, which is kind of a different style to her other books that have been translated. This is sort of a mythology retelling. I remember that I didn't love this, and I think it might have been just my expectations of her writing. Then we have Grotesque. This is the first Natsuo Kirino book I read, and there was something about this that struck me at the time that I read it, so that is why I ended up exploring more of her books. And finally we have Out. It's kind of dark, but as with all of Kirino's works, I think there's a lot of sort of feminist themes in them, and the way that gender stereotypes and expectations restrain these women's lives, and sometimes the desperate moves that they take in reaction to that. I think this is probably her best, if not Real World, which is the one that I don't own. And then lastly we have Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami, and this has somehow ended up split up from the other Murakami books. The first of the nature nonfiction books I have on this shelf is How to Catch a Mole and Find Yourself in Nature by Marc. I didn't love this book. Probably some of the things that I didn't love is the fact that he was a mole catcher, and his perspective really shapes what he talks about in connection with nature. I think also that there was just not enough to this book for me. I've kept it because it's part of the Wainwright books, and I think I will probably keep all of my Wainwright readings just because I want to have them because of the sort of significance they have in my reading life. Next is Time Song by Julia Blackburn. This is another one of the 2019 long-listed Wainwright books, and I think this was also shortlisted. This one I liked a lot more. Exploration of Doggerland and sort of the evidence that we have of this place and time, I think is a really interesting melding of history and nature writing. Next we have A Honeybee Heart Has 5 Openings, A Year of Keeping Bees by Helen Jukes. This is probably my favorite cover of any book that I own. It's sort of about the honeybees themselves and characteristics of the honeybees and all of those things that I found really interesting. A lot of this book is also just a memoir of the author, and I think that was when it was weaker for me. Next we have Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer that does not want to stand on its own. There were just so many useful pieces of information in this book in terms of the problems with factory farming, the health benefits of not eating meat, the environmental aspects to it, the moral and ethical, and it's just sort of a wide-ranging look at the problems with systematic eating of animals. Next is Cabin Porn, Inspiration for Your Quiet Place Somewhere, and this is a collection of photography of various cabins in the woods. I love it. I think it's a beautiful book. It's beautifully put together. Moving on, we have Lab Girl, A Story of Trees, Science and Love by Hope Jahren. The book is generally just about the author's experience as a nature scientist and her background in becoming interested in the first place. This is called Rats, Observation of the History and Habitat of the City's Most Unwanted Inhabitants, and it's by Robert Sullivan. It's a natural history about rats. This is an example of a book that you don't need to be interested in nature to want to read, because of course rats live where humans live. The whole situation with garbage disposal, that is one of the reasons that rats are so have an opportunity to flourish in big cities, and it's also sort of a portrait of New York. There's a lot of talk about New York as a city and the way that it's structured and the way that it works and breathes and all of those things. So rats is just, the rats themselves are just sort of part of the city's geography. The next one I have is Outskirts, Living Life on the Edge of the Green Belt by John Grindrod, and this was again shortlisted for the Wainwright in 2018. I don't feel like it's very nature-centered. It's more about architecture of the cities and the way that the suburban areas and rural areas have changed over time with house crises, nature sort of taking a step back and not being valued very highly, people just building new things everywhere and not really thinking about the consequences. The next book is Hidden Nature, A Voyage of Discovery by Alys Fowler. This is again a combination of memoir and nature writing, and it's sort of sports writing as well, connected with nature and with personal growth. So basically in this book, Alys Fowler talks about exploring her sexuality alongside exploring the canals of the UK with a kayak. So it's kind of using nature as a mirroring of her personal journey, and I think in that aspect it really works. Then we have a book that I read quite a few years ago. It is Rainbow Dust, 3 Centuries of Delight in British Butterflies by Peter Mahrren. It's a book about butterflies and the British endless fascination for butterflies. When I originally read it, I rated it 3 stars, I think, because there was so much history to it, and sort of the study of butterflies and other insects, and the Victorians' fascination with collecting butterflies, and how that continued on into the sort of until the midpoint of the 20th century. I remember that when I first read this book, I was a bit disappointed in all of the discussion around the butterflies and the human relationship with butterflies, but as time has gone on, that has been something that I've continued to think about and been curious about. So it ended up being a book that has actually stuck with me in more significant ways than I thought it would. Next is Waterfalls of Stars by Roseanne Alexander, My 10 Years on the Island of Skoma, and honestly I don't think I need to talk about this book because I've talked about it endlessly in the last half year. Another book from the Wainwright 2019, and another book that I have reviewed together with the next book, I think, The Easternmost House by Juliet Blacksland. I have very mixed feelings about this book, and I liked certain aspects of it a lot, and a lot of aspects not so much. So again, I think this is a book that I would probably not have kept if it wasn't part of the Wainwright books. I felt like it was really accusatory in the tone, and that was something that really put me off. This is the other one I think I reviewed alongside The Easternmost House. This is Wilding by Isabella Tree. This one though is fantastic. This is kind of hard going. I think it is very detail oriented, so it's about rewilding of a specific location in the UK. In doing so, she explores sort of ideas about nature and wildness and the control of nature and all of those things that are kind of important when thinking about nature. So the next one is Other Minds, The Octopus and the Evolution of Intelligent Life by Peter Godfrey-Smith. A book all about octopuses and their minds and their consciousness. It is kind of scientific in the tone of the language and things like that, and it's covering a lot of the scientific research that has been done on the subject. So again, an example of a book that is harder to read because of the dryness of it, but also really interesting. If you are already interested in the topic, worth the read in my opinion. The next one is sort of the opposite to the previous one. It is The Soul of an Octopus by Cy Montgomery. It's beautiful. I think Montgomery is a really beautiful writer, and she is an example of the kind of nature writer that melds the memoir side of things really successfully. Then we come to another book that does not need an introduction, Foxes Unearthed, A Story of Love and Loathing in Modern Britain by Lucy Jones. I love this book. I was first introduced to nature nonfiction, or my love for nature nonfiction was sparked by this book. I think this might actually be my favorite nature nonfiction I've ever read. It is The Great Soul of Siberia, In Search of the Elusive Siberian Tiger by Soo-Young Park. This is a book written from someone who has studied Siberian tigers for more than 20 years. Then we have The Seabird's Cry, The Lives and Loves of Puffins, Gannets, and Other Ocean Voyages by Adam Nicholson. So this is another example of a really good nature writing that is critical, that is beautiful, that is thought-provoking, that is fact-oriented. It's, again, a really good meddling of those things. I think the only thing that this has against it is that the structure of the book, I think, isn't optimal. It is talking about one species at a time, and it's harder to get an overall sense of the seabirds through the structure, I think, especially if you're not already familiar with all of the different species. Then we have another book that hasn't been talked a lot about on BookTube, or at least I haven't seen it. It is Corvus, A Life with Birds by Esther Wolfson. Again, this is an example of the nature memoir medley, where the memoir is kind of stronger than the science aspect. And this is a book I love, and it's talking about Esther Wolfson's experience with all kinds of corvus birds. Next book I have is The Dunko Rib, A Very Natural Childhood by John Lister Kay. Again, a Wainwright book. There's a lot of Wainwright books in my nature books because I started reading nature nonfiction and discovered the Wainwright Prize quite shortly after, so they sort of go hand in hand. This one, though, I don't love. There's kind of some iffy things related to how to behave with animals that I don't really love in this, and just in general I didn't find the author always easy to empathize with. There are sections that I liked in it, like just playing outside a lot as a child, and those sections when he's looking back in his childhood. The last book on this shelf that I've read for the Wainwright Prize is The Salt Path by Raynor Winn, and this is actually one that I've made a video review of in connection with the Wainwright Prize, and that review has it has become my most watched video. Basically, this book is about Raynor Winn and her husband dealing with a lot of challenges in their life, the rumination of things related to home and homelessness, things related to connecting with nature and dealing with loss and change and transformation. It's a really beautiful book and I would definitely recommend it. And lastly on this shelf we have H is for Hawk. Helen MacDonald's memoir is sort of threefold in that it is a grief memoir about her dealing with the passing of her father. It is also sort of a T.H. White biography, and it is nature writing and her trying to train a goshawk. I do like it, it's just not my favorite nature nonfiction by any stretch. So that is the entire third shelf.